Good morning, world. This is Steve Rao on Pod and Roku TV's World Edition. I'm having some issues with my Wi-Fi today, so if I'm running slow, I hope you can hear me, and we'll go ahead and begin the show. Today we are on Roku TV, Pod TV, and I want to welcome you from wherever you are in the world, right here from the All-America city of Morrisville in the Research Triangle Park, North Carolina. Today on this show, we all will talk about global affairs, innovation, sustainability, and we talk a lot about an ever-changing and disruptive world. But today, I wanted to go ahead and begin with just a quick year in the review. As we end 2022 and begin in a few days 2023. First of all, the year began with the World Olympics, the Winter Olympics in Beijing. Hard to believe that was a year ago. And then we had the invasion of Ukraine. Everyone thought Russia would prevail overwhelmingly, but the Ukrainians still resist. A year later, we are still at war. Gas prices and inflation are at all-time high, pushing the world into a global recession. And the Federal Reserve has raised interest rates a number of times, hitting consumers and hitting those who are trying to buy homes. Britain, United Kingdom has a new prime minister, Rishi Sunak, who replaced Liz Truss. We passed an Inflation Reduction Act. President Biden was successful in passing some bipartisan gun reform legislation. And we had, speaking of guns, terrible gun violence in the U.S., with Uvalde, Texas, spearing off a huge flurry of gun shootings and really had Americans question what is going on in our country. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the midterm elections. There were some surprises. As Donald Trump's candidates, many of them did not win, but the Republicans did win a squeaky margin in the House, and the Democrats held on to the Senate, with a new speaker most likely being Kevin McCarthy and Nancy Pelosi giving up the gavel to Hakeem Jeffries. We're going to be talking about what this means for the 2024 elections, as it looks like it's going to be a rematch between President Joe Biden and possibly Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis, who, by the way, ordered trucks or vans or planes to take refugees away from Florida to Martha's Vineyard. And by the way, the refugee crisis continues to get worse as millions flood the borders into Texas, particularly El Paso. I could go on and on. I forgot about the shot heard around the world as Chris Rock was slapped by Will Smith when he made a joke about his wife. We forgot to talk about that. And we lost a lot of famous people along the way before I go to my closeout. The bottom line is that we lost Sidney Poitier. The world will no longer have a Queen Elizabeth. We have a new King Charles. We lost Franco Harris because I'm a Steelers fan, Nick Bollettieri, I'm a tennis fan, Sidney Poitier, Olivia Newton-John, as we have an Australian on the show, Shaquille Latimer, and a number of other people that no longer are with us. May they rest in peace. My final message of the day, I'm wearing my president's shirt, was the highlight was being a guest at the White House at the invitation of President Biden and First Lady Joe Biden and the Vice President of the United States, gathering leaders from across the country to hear the president's message of light and hope and purpose. As a son of immigrants from India, never in my lifetime did I ever think that a president of the United States would actually have a Diwali reception. It was a great way for me to cap out the year, an emotional moment. As we begin the show and we prepare to begin for a new year, let us remember that we often are moving at such a fast pace. Running the show, sometimes I feel like the analogy is we're like in a car that just keeps going faster and faster and faster, never taking time to slow down for a tune-up or an oil change. Recently, I had to get a new car because I myself, during the pandemic, did not change my car and my oil enough, and then I had to buy a new car. Perhaps the most important operating systems are the ones right here in the human heart: empathy, forgiveness, love, compassion, doing those kind things to people we don't even know, strangers. Perhaps that's the most important upgrade we need, ourselves, as we continue to live in a turbulent, divisive, and oftentimes negative world. We'll be talking about these today, but that's my New Year's message as we close out 2022. Mark, let's get started. And we bring in Mark Lee and our panelists and other guests. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year. That'll be coming our way on the 31st, which is tomorrow. New Year's Eve celebrations will be going on. Actually, I have a very good friend that'll be performing in Raleigh and all of that with his funk band and all along those lines. So that's where I may be at. Haven't decided that 100% yet or all along those lines. But we've also got some other news stories that you did not mention and all in that space.
Yeah, I forgot to the
Chris, because
news
I
clip.
definitely want to mention one of them to Chris and all in that line. But definitely,
Yeah.
we did have Elon Musk by Twitter, and we saw things going on, as you mentioned, with the stock market and other things happening in the world. Of course, there were news stories coming out of Africa, Asia, and a number of other places, and even right here in the United States. I know you mentioned some of those shootings that were taking place and all in that line. And on a personal note, I actually did one yesterday. I think it was my third one, if I remember correctly. It was actually with somebody that Chris had the pleasure of interviewing this past year and all in that space. But one of the things that was new to the network, or at least new to my involvement with the network, was that we did not one, not two, but I believe 3 live streaming events that were supporting various causes. One of them was around leukemia and lymphoma, as I had mentioned to y'all several times before. Another one was around the veterans, and that was with Greg Bicknell. So I know that you had the pleasure of interviewing Chris and all of that. And the last one that I just did on yesterday was a 12-hour live stream for Philip Jones, and that was all around transplants and his organization, A Second Chance. So definitely wanted to mention that to you, Chris, because I know that you are a person that has had to deal with transplants as well. So we did a whole hour, I think that was at 2:00 yesterday, but we had the pleasure of raising some money for that Second Chance organization and just raise awareness about transplants in general. Actually interviewed in that show a gentleman that runs something about athletes, because a lot of times transplant people become athletes. So there is an athlete organization that the gentleman that I interviewed, Zach Brooks, is part of, and all in that space. So just wanted to bring that up, since I know that you are one that has dealt with that yourself as well, Chris. And then I also wanted to bring in Lee Newton Rose, because he might have some thoughts about some of the other things that you brought up, Steve.
And I forgot to mention,
just real quickly, Mark, you brought up athletes, and Steve, you brought up a long list of people who unfortunately are not with us today. I think you may have missed Pele, unless I missed it.
Oh, I just missed it. Yeah, it just came in this morning. Yeah, I apologize.
Wow.
Yeah, Pele. Yeah, that just came in this morning. Yeah, really sad. He's no longer with us. And I remember there was a movie made with him with Sylvester Stallone. I can't remember what it was. And
it was called Victory.
Yeah, that was a really
and Sylvester Stallone played a goalie. Pele was in it. It was about a bunch of POWs that were taking on the German army soccer team, and basically they escaped as a result of that. So yeah, it's called Victory. Good movie. Pele was fantastic. There's an entire album called Pele. I have it. It was done by Sergio Mendes, because of course Sergio Mendes is Brazilian, and so is Pele. And I'll tell you, man, Pele was, that's the reason I got into soccer, was, watching him in the World Cup that year, 1972 and 71, 72. He was unbelievably good. It was amazing that guy and what he could do with a soccer ball. But it all had, and the interesting thing about it is the history of that was he was picked up on the street when he was juggling an orange with his feet. And basically the coach went by him and said, "How'd you like to play soccer?" And he goes, "Okay, what's that?" Because he hadn't played. He just had this juggling thing. And they picked him up and they slapped a jersey on him and put him on the national team. So, he was an amazing kid at the age of whatever it was, 14, 15, and just kept going on and on and on. So that's great.
We might talk about his career next week. And this was kind of a last minute. I had a really busy week with no car for my wife. So I've been being a chauffeur the last 2 days and my 2 days off. But real quickly, we're going to go around. We didn't get to everything. It's hard to do the whole year, but I think I hit the main ones. The war in Ukraine. Obviously, we're still talking about that. Gas and inflation and economy getting worse, which has led to unstable Europe. And you look at what's going on in the United Kingdom, the Inflation Reduction Act, and a year after the American Rescue Plan, and then of course all of this instability in the midterm elections and how it affected the political climate of America. And what does that mean going into 2023 as we ramp up? It's really the beginning of the 2024 presidential race. and I'll be seeing Wiley Nickel. I'll be on the at the Congress for his swearing in on Tuesday, and it's the first time in my life where I actually know 6 Congress members well, to the point that they're my friends, which is really, really strange. That's not how you know you've been in politics a long time, but I hopefully will catch up with Congressman Nickel, who did say he would like to come back on the show. And gentlemen, what is your thoughts? As we've hosted this show, it seems like there's been so much news coming at us so fast.
One of the things you just referenced, and I'd love to hear Lee's thoughts, and we've definitely talked about one of the issues that is still very much in the news and everything, but one of the things that has been in the news, and I think it'll be in the news in 2023, possibly even longer than that, and all along those lines, is the return to quote unquote normal and all of that, because we did see more and more people that were going to live events. There was a time during the pandemic that athletic events and other kinds of events, even the award shows, were done in that virtual space. And now more and more people, including workers, are going back to live work environments and all of that. But that being said, that also means that they have to figure out whether they're going to go fully in 2023, or whether we're going to have more of a hybrid kind of environment and all in that space.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention that. I'll take a start. I mean, I do think we have seen a lifting of restrictions, more of a return to normal. So it really got busy. We always wondered, would we see people keep the hybrid models? But now you're seeing much more of a return to in-person. So a couple things that I miss having events recorded, because that was one nice thing. Now you're seeing less of that. So people are going back. So if you miss the event, you don't get the content, which was nice to be able to go back and get the recording. And things are busier than they were a year ago, even before the pandemic. I feel like people are having more events. So
yeah, I don't know how Lee feels. I don't know how Lee feels about that, but I would say that there are still a number of folks that are recording their events. I know that I've been to a couple of meetings. Those meetings are usually recorded and are available for folks that were not able to make the meeting. I even saw that with the Carolina Theater, which I just stepped down from on after doing 2 terms. I might go back after a hiatus term that they require and everything in 2024, 2025. But that being said, there was a lot of recordings that are available. And I actually coined a new term. Yes, Chris, I came up with a new term. I'm actually calling it Tribrit, because now there's a lot of people that are doing not just the virtual, which is the kind of like watching things on the internet, Zoom kind of things, or StreamYard, which we're using, and things in that space. And then, like you said, there's a live in-person stuff. But then if you add virtual reality, augmented reality, and metaverse kind of stuff, then you're actually talking about a tribrid. So I've actually coined a new term. I don't know, it's in the dictionary. Webster, if you don't have it, Mark Lee came up with it. Tribrid. Don't forget to give me the claim, and all along those lines. So I've coined this new phrase, and I know that maybe Lee has some thoughts around that.
No, I agree with Steve. I think one of the downsides of coming back to normal or old school is we will not have those recordings for learning purposes. I think they're invaluable for people who miss class, for whatever reason they're good. But they should not replace in person. We have pictures of know people who even before COVID came, they walk around with the old camcorders, and taking pictures to them was more important than experiencing the moment. And I think they're missing the moment by doing that. But there is a value to having pictures in movies as a remembrance. And sometimes if you can't be there, you can't be there. As our parents, or as we get older, sometimes we can't be everywhere at the same time that we would like to be. So Zoom or recordings of birthday parties or weddings is something that we treasure, and that should not be lost. But it doesn't replace being there if you can.
And
yeah,
being there.
I think so. I think that's.
I think I've taught on and off. I've taught everything from middle school all the way to undergraduate. And there is something about being able to look in a student's eyes and see the understanding and the recognition of that material. And if they do not recognize that concept, then I know that I have to rephrase or do something, back up, maybe explain it a different way or do whatever. I think that virtual learning is going to be the absolute destruction of our country. It's impersonal. It's bullcrap. I've had classes that are ridiculously dumb from the standpoint of individuals putting together a curriculum and then shoving it online, and you have to do this and this and this test. Oh, and reading this. Oh, and we're going to give you a test at the end. You tell me where the instructor is involved in that, other than making the curriculum or whatever else. a waste, and it's a waste for our kids. Our kids are not going to understand the eye-to-eye contact that needs to be made to be able to do the things that need to be done with our lives. And it's going to be really an impersonal situation. It's going to be bad. Bad.
I'm sorry, years ago in parenting, there was this thing, quality over quantity. And I think a lot of people came to the reality, you cannot have quality unless you have quantity with children or classroom. It just doesn't work.
Well, let me go further with that, Lee. A PhD is not a PhD to me anymore. You can say, "Oh, I got my PhD." I want to know where you got it, and I want to know how you got it. Because if you got it from University of Phoenix, guess what? That's a bachelor's plus. You're talking about bullcrap dissertations that are never published that sit there and say PhDs. Mark, I'm telling you, you get people that are PhDs.
We had this conversation before. I think we had it yesterday or a couple of days ago and everything. There are a lot of folks that have fake doctorates and things along those lines. I mean, there's an entire university that is, was owned by one of the former presidents and all of that. And
I agree.
That and everything along those
that was
lines.
Ridiculous.
So there are a lot of those degrees that are being offered there. Sometimes they're being offered by different organizations and everything. But I will counter something that you said, because I'm not arguing totally with what you said.
Sure.
I do agree with some of what you are bringing up and everything. But one of the counters that I would make to that is that when the pandemic first happened, and that was many years ago, it was actually some of the teachers that already knew how to teach in that environment that were the better ones. Because I have a friend of mine that was still is a teacher in Las Vegas and teaches at various universities and both online and in person and everything, but they had already been in that space before the pandemic happened. So I think that they were prepared. I do agree with what you said, that a lot of teachers and a lot of people were not prepared and still aren't prepared. So that could be a problem with virtual teaching. And yes, there are a lot of people that are getting degrees just like out of the wind from these different organizations that don't necessarily have done the work to get the degree and all in that space. And the other thing that I was going to just bring up as part of that is that definitely that is a problematic, but also small groups and even dealing work in technology can be a good thing. I have a very good friend of mine that is part of an art intensive that we're teaching at the Heritage Center. For those that are worldwide, that is a African American cultural arts center here in Durham, North Carolina. And part of what he is teaching is around robots and drones and everything. So he's teaching young people about that. And there are, relatively small classes. So he's able to give more one-on-one kind of instruction. It's not like an instruction with hundreds or thousands of kids.
Well, the thing is, interesting, I'm going to be teaching a drone class to the local community college here, Vance Granville Community College. And the one thing that FAA has a certification program where you actually take a test and you can be a FAA certified drone pilot. I think that is more important, the regulations at that point in time, than actually learning how to fly a drone. And I'm a certified drone pilot. I'm also a private pilot with 200 plus hours in the air. I mean, I have that type of background. But I wanted to springboard off of what Steve was saying about the midterm politics and all this thing. I want to say something, Steve, about this whole situation. Let's take a look at two countries, just two, but I could bring up five, but I'll just bring up two at this point. Brazil, number one. So I have it on my share screen here. So Brazil, right? Which Bolsonaro, big country, right? The biggest, one of the biggest, if not the biggest in South America is right here. So you have Brazil, which Bolsonaro lost to Lula, right? Da Silva. So, all of a sudden he lost and everyone's sitting there saying, yay, yay, Da Silva won, yay, yay, yay. Well, guess what? It's parliamentary. And guess who runs parliament? Guess who runs parliament is Bolsonaro's followers. There you go. Second country, France, all the way across the Atlantic here. But we're just going to hit France here. Macron wins, right? Macron, yay, he's great. Guess what? Guess who runs France's parliament? Ain't Macron. So he's trying to pass all this stuff and try to figure out what's going on, but he's having an issue with that. So he's off doing his own diplomatic stuff with Algeria and all kind of other things to make things happen. I'm actually, Mark, you've convinced me. I'm writing a book. I'm writing a book on France. I'm writing a book on why we should not trust France. I'm actually writing a book on that, all the way from a Revolutionary War all the way up to present time, and all the different aspects of why we should not trust them at all in any situation. And so there's Macron sitting there doing that stuff. He's trying to figure out what's going on. Of course, he was at the losing World Cup match between France and Argentina. Yay, Argentina. So So that's just 2 countries. And I can bring up, Richie Sunak. Oh, he's doing great. Yeah, Steve. Congratulations to Richie Sunak, because, of course, I'm sorry. That's right. They are transporting the migrants that are coming across the channel from the UK. Richie Sunak, I'm sure, doesn't know anything about this, to a place. Let's see, where are they going? Oh, yeah, they're going to Rwanda. So they're shipping them all the way down into Rwanda. Gave Rwanda, what was it, 150 million euros or whatever it was, pounds sterling, to take these people. That's interesting. That is very interesting. Yes, the UK, the epitome of anti-racism, and just, no, they're not xenophobic, not at all. And of course, Richie Sunak is sitting back going with his MBA from a U.S. from a U.S. Corporation, by the way, or U.S. institution here, and has a green card for the United States. He was thinking about coming to the United States and staying here, and then kind of second thought it and figured out trust was going to just go down the tube. So he kind of sat there and ran that. So yeah, we have a great leadership area here, that we take a look at. But the bottom line is you can win your nice chairmanship, or you can win your nice premiership, you can win prime minister, you can win all that stuff. But the bottom line is, if the parliament or Congress is run by the opposite party, now all of a sudden you have to sit back and say, okay, now I got to do some negotiation with whatever's going on.
Speaking of negotiation, there's something else that you can't avoid that happens every year, and this year was no different, and that is the lovely things that go on with the climate and all in that space. Because we had 2 major hurricanes in September, that being Fiona and Ian and all in that space. Fiona definitely did some devastation on Puerto Rico. I don't know that they've totally recovered. I know that Ian did some damage in South Carolina and Florida. I don't know that they've totally recovered. I know that California hasn't recovered from those lovely wildfires that go on a regular basis and all along those lines. And apparently the world's largest active volcano, Mauna Loa in Hawaii, erupted for the first time in nearly 40 years. And that was all this year as well. So I don't know, do we need to be paying attention? Because I know a lot of times the news media does pay attention to some of these climate things that take place.
Mark,
but hey, things are going to happen with the climate.
I just want to point something out that you said, that frequently they'll say this, worst thing that happened in 40, 50, 60 years. So the volcano, worst volcano eruption in 40 years. What does that mean? That means it did it 40 years ago too.
Right. Yeah, well, you say the same.
Well, that's interesting, and you bring that stuff up, and Lee. Now you've gotten into the data thing, right? So you sit back and you say, this blizzard that happened is the worst blizzard in 40 years, 50 years. It's the worst blizzard ever. It's funny because I was in Buffalo when that last blizzard hit. I was actually taking my father. I lived in Olean at the time. Olean was actually hit worse than Buffalo was. But he said, Chris, we're going to go to Buffalo Airport. And I said, Dad, look outside. There is a foot of snow outside. He says, Buffalo Airport is open, Chris. We're going. And I took this 1972 Volkswagen Bug, and we dug it out, and we snowplowed our way all the way to Buffalo Airport from Olean. And let me tell you something. Buffalo Airport was open. It was open. Flights were going out. It was unbelievable.
Chris, along those same lines, and I don't know what people's thoughts about this are, Sasha's actually brought it up a couple of times when we brought it up around these flooding incidents and everything. And he actually has a very valid point, but I don't know what people's thoughts are, because you're right. These things do happen every year. They do happen on a regular basis, and they happen consistently. There was even that flooding that took place in eastern Kentucky and they usually will give you the death toll, and the death toll is usually somewhere in the teens or in the maybe hundreds or something like that. I think there might have been a couple that might have hit 8,000, but mostly they're in the teens and hundreds, even if they've hit parts of the other parts of the world and things along those lines. I think we just saw that was one of those parades that had a car run through it and everything. But those numbers are minuscule in comparison to the amount of people that are dying in wars, whether it's in Ukraine or Somalia and all of that. So I'm not discounting or belittling the deaths that are being lost and all of that in these spaces. But I do sometimes wonder, do we take some of these things out of context when there are bigger issues that are taking more lives? And we can even mention COVID, which is still going on, because actually I just had a conversation with my dad recently, who's at a beach trip, at their annual beach trip, and they're in lockdown because one of the members actually had to leave the house because they caught it and all of that. So that's took place.
I think, it's interesting. And, I think that, these lockdowns. China's COVID policy kind of still having issues with COVID, and it's just we know that the virus is going to continue to stick around, and then you've got other diseases. And one thing I was reading Fareed Zakaria's book again on my vacation, and the fact of the matter is we haven't had this conversation, but how much more likely we are to have pandemics in the future. Just because of human animal contact and 80 million animals we slaughter a year for meat, and in these urban areas, just the ability to transfer viruses. Now, whether we could outlaw wet markets and things like that.
But Stash,
Mark, I just want to push back on Steve a little bit. Not discounting what you're saying, but you're making an assumption that pandemics only come from animals.
Well, not only that, but and Steve,
Not being creative.
I was going to push back slightly on something you said as well, because some of those things that you're talking about in terms of where they're coming from is from third world countries or countries that might be considered second world or whatever along those lines. But let's not forget that there have been some things even in the United States that haven't been totally addressed. And sometimes it's because of where they are at in the sense of being a poor country or a poor state, one of the poorest states. And I don't know that they've solved their problem yet, is Mississippi. I don't think anybody would deny that Mississippi has problems in terms of its economics and in terms of the amount of poor people that are in Mississippi. And they had that lovely water treatment facility incident where it began to fail, meaning that it couldn't get the water to fight fires. There were no reliably flushed toilets, and there were other critical needs that were not met in the latter part of August. And I don't know that there has been a answer yet or solution yet. And I'm not saying that.
Mark, didn't Flint, Michigan have a similar problem?
Flint, Michigan had a similar problem. I would agree with that.
And I'm sorry, Chris.
Go ahead.
And some of these problems are man-made, not only man-made, but they're voluntary. Such as you can tell people so much in terms of the hazards of smoking, but they just continue to smoke, knowing the diseases it's going to cause. And what do? We can't stop them.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're just going to have to be prepared, Lee, for what if another pandemic hit. Hopefully, we learn enough from the last pandemic. The good news is we develop mRNA technology, and these kinds of things are going to help us develop vaccines quicker. And I think we also learned that our healthcare system may not be as strong and flexible and agile as we need to, in China, so I think they can create hospitals quicker and things like that. Hey, real quickly, guys, before. The two things I forgot to mention in my opening, I didn't have as much time to practice today because I was in the rush to get here on time. But first, let's go into guns. I mean, we had Uvalde, Texas, continuing discussion. We had some tragedies in Raleigh. There's been more gun shootings in Durham recently. Obviously, I don't know whether it's just we're reporting on them more, or is there really, obviously the guns getting in the hands of wrong people.
I mean, the guns are definitely getting in the hands of wrong people, but actually, I believe it was Lee that brought it up on the past show and everything. And I'm actually going to bring up another news story that got a little bit of notice really quickly, but then it just kind of disappeared, even though the person, when they were in the news the first time, was all over the news. And I don't know, it was because of the politics and everything. But Lee, I remember one time that you asked about the gun violence and you asked about knives. And there was a famous person that during the year of 2022 was actually stabbed. He was stabbed during a lecture there in Western New York. And that was the author Salman Rushdie. Did we hear that much more about Salman Rushdie, or even the fact that he was stabbed after the incident took place? I mean, they arrested the guy, but Salman Rushdie, when he first had that controversial book, was all over the news, and I don't remember that much coverage of Salman Rushdie being stabbed. And you're there in New York, maybe I missed it, but I don't remember that much.
Well, you also probably don't remember it's not much coverage in terms of knife safety and eliminating knives from our culture. Evil exists, and it's a shame, and I don't understand why, but it exists, and we're not going to eliminate evil. Whether it's coming from guns or coming from knives or coming from cars through parades, it's going to happen, or bombs or the shoe bomber or whatever. Taking knives or guns or anything away from law-abiding citizens is not making anyone safer. If anything, it's making them victims. I don't understand. I just don't understand the logic. Gun violence. Every weekend in Chicago, you have massive murders there. No one's talking about that. Why not? Because it doesn't affect them? Because it's inconvenient because it's handguns? Why do we talk about the 2% versus the 98%? I don't get it.
Well, I think it's as Nick said in one of the previous shows, this is a mental health issue. You know, this is the ability of an ability of individual. And the thing is, we had a guest on the other day that was talking about the correlation, not causation, the correlation of gun violence or violence and video games. I think that people have a proclivity towards violence way before they have anything having to do with games or anything else. They have that proclivity towards violence. It's ignored. And then all of a sudden they end up going out and shooting people. And I think that's the thing that has to be, you know, that is a family issue. I think you know, families have an obligation to make sure that their children, you know, are, you know, okay. And if their children are not okay, then it's up to them to make sure that they get the help that they need, and that the U.S. provides that needed help to be able to get them on the straight and narrow. And there is no time in the world where you should ever tell your kid where your gun is or anything else unless that kid has been trained and understands exactly what's going on.
I just real quickly, I just want to say something with Chris, and I don't know if he has a date on this or not, but I would bet dollars to donuts that most of these violent criminals with the gun violence or knife violence, there's not a dad in the home. There's not an intact family. For the vast majority, there's issues there that they're not getting it from the home because the home doesn't exist. All of us over here, we're not in jail. We haven't committed these violent crimes. But I think that the home and the dad, more than the mother is important, is where these kids are getting some discipline and some reasonableness. And it's not the fact that there's guns available or not. Because when we all grew up, at least I know when I grew up, and probably Chris also, I don't know about Steve and Mark, guns were available much more than they are now. Much easier to get.
Well, I grew up in a
but we didn't go to school. So we don't start shooting up schools or blocks of parties.
I grew up in Warrenton, which is a rural town in North Carolina, and it's actually deer hunting territory.
I just wanted to point this out.
There's definitely plenty of guns that were available all over the place. But
right.
One of the things that I was going to ask, and I don't know whether Steve's got some thoughts or even you, Lee, or Chris about this, but the other thing that has caused a rise in this, and I don't know that I think that we've addressed that either in education, is that we are always looking for the boogeyman in society, whatever that boogeyman might be. So then there is easier to go after a group, and that is where some of the incidences have taken place because they are seen as a target, whether that is the LGBT community, which is what happened in Colorado, whether that is the Asian community, which we know happened in California when COVID first started and is still going on in 2022, or whether that is other communities as well. So I do think that we have to have some serious conversations, and I do appreciate you bringing it up, Chris, that it's not just one-sided. There are hate groups that exist in the minority community as well, and they need to be addressed also in that space. But I do think that sometimes there are targets on folks' backs, and that adds to the notion that you can go after them, whatever that group is. Because, you know, if I'm having problems in my economics, what is better for a politician to do than to tell me that it's not my fault, but it's the fault of the Hispanic gentleman that's coming across the border that took my job, even though I probably didn't want the job in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I think we provide a lot of excuses. I think Steve would agree with this. You know, we provide a lot of excuses for firearm violence. And I think the bottom line is this, and I'll say it again, I'll say it again, I'll say it again. People have a proclivity towards violence before anything else happens in their life. They have this thing where they feel that violence is the solution to whatever problem they have at that point in time, whether it be job, school, friends, bullying, whatever it is. Violence is going to solve it, and they're going to take out individuals that are in their way, or the situation is that they've decided that that's going to be it. And there's no reset button to that. It's a mental health issue, and I think Nick is right with this. It's a mental health issue. I have on my supplemental screen, or my screen, I have firearm homicide and firearm suicide rates in the United States between 2011 and 2020. Now the thing is. And Lee, you know, make a good point. There's no mention of whether these are rifles or, you know, small firearms or whatever else. And you can see that the firearm homicide rate has increased. substantially between 2019 and 2020. But look at the firearm suicide. It's barely budged between 2019. This thing has been high since 2017. That was way before the pandemic. So why are we having, and this is aged greater than 10 years. You mean to tell, I mean, my God, 11-year-olds with a gun shooting themselves.
I'm glad that Nick has joined us, because part of it is that also that, and I know we're going to deal with this on Monday, but social media has definitely got out there, and people can put out whatever things that they want to on social media, whether it's been vetted or not vetted, and all in that space. So a lot of people are out there and they're doing a lot of stuff. Every time I turn around, there's a new social media app that is being created and all in that space. So definitely that is part of the conversation, as well as how much we are allowing people to put out all kinds of conversations, including some conversations that make absolutely no sense or that aren't based on any sense of reality, and all in that kind of way. Because I do know that, Facebook even targeted us and everything. And I know that, I've gone into clubhouse rooms and heard all kinds of crazy theories.
Anyway. By the way, Chris, here's a potential solution that Lee may want, and the panel may want to address, because Congress, notice, doesn't address anything that's worthwhile. Okay.
We all can agree on that.
They just don't. Okay, because they're too busy on awarding University of Georgia as a wonderful law school, or we got to go after Trump. But
go dogs.
And opioids, which are important issues, are not addressed. One solution is to require every year when somebody's in school to go through a mental health evaluation by a professional. Okay, because it's a progressive disease, especially schizophrenia, bipolar disease, etc. If it's identified earlier, there's treatments that can be done. Now, this is a solution to a problem, is that you interview the kids, have a mental health professional do just like what we were required to do when I was in parochial schools. See,
Nick, I'm sorry. I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea. Nick, I don't necessarily disagree with you. But who's going to be? Where's the mental health professional employed by the school board?
Well, not only that, but Nick,
then I have a problem. All of these kids are going to a pediatrician who should be able to take up on this.
No, Nick, I got a question tied into what Lee was just saying, and all of that, which is my.
There's not even a conversation about.
No, I got that. And we definitely need to have the conversation
inside the school, who actually does an evaluation at least once a year, just like when I was in school, elementary school, I was required to go every year through a health evaluation. In other words, the Catholic schools would not let you in if you didn't pass the health evaluations. You have tuberculosis, you have malaria. You have
I think the public schools require those, right? All those, right? The health screening.
Those things are required. But I was also going to ask: don't most schools, and Lee, correct me if I'm wrong, don't most schools have a guidance counselor? My mom was a guidance counselor. I thought that's part of the job.
They're not trained, though, Mark. They're not trained. They're not trained. No, Mark is correct in terms of guidance counselors, but to Nick's point, the guidance counselors are not trained in this modality.
Mental health professionals, I agree. The guidance counselors are anybody who shows up and says, I'm a guidance counselor. Okay, a trained mental health professional is usually a person, a psychiatrist, a psychologist at worst, a psychiatrist at best, because they can prescribe medication, and they meet with the kids once a year. Now, this is if you want to solve a problem. Now, if you don't want to solve a problem, you just continue doing what you're doing, which is not.
But Nick, I've got to ask you a question, because I've watched enough science fiction now, and I've got friends that are in the science fiction span and the science fiction field of reading, and in some cases even making the movies and everything. And there's a term called I've got it, but it's like a dystopian view of the society, meaning there's less than utopian and all of that. And my fear with what you're saying is, who's going to determine who is crazy or not crazy? It's kind of like that notion of, your revolutionary is my freedom fighter and all of that. So who's going to determine that, and who's going to do the medication? Who's going to do whatever the fear is that.
Mark, why use the word crazy? I abhor that term, because, we talk about crazy. Now, you can sit back. A lot of things happen to an individual. First of all, we have a chemical balance in our bodies. Correct. That when that chemical goes imbalanced, we can actually go crazy. We can actually or we can have a fever, or we can die. I mean, chemical imbalances is an absolute positive diagnosis of many problems happen with that. Gut issues. I mean, they have correlated that to MS, to Parkinson's, to all kind of different things. You know what they've established? poop transplant. You get a poop transplant, and that helps to clean out that gut. I mean, stuff like this is really it's breathtaking. I mean, literally and figuratively.
Your point, and this comes
I'm not going to talk to that, Chris.
everything to your point, and I brought it up on the show, so I'm not speaking out of school on myself and everything. But I have what is called dysgraphia. It's a form of dyslexia. It means that I have the left and the right thing is slightly different for me. So technically, that is a chemical imbalance. Who's to say that somebody that is in control is going to be like, Mark, we got to put you on Ritalin, or we got to put you on some drug that's going to make me a zombie and everything because of what exists. I'm not going out there and not trying to grab a gun or do anything.
No, I agree. I mean, and if I'll tell you something. This happened to me personally. Okay. Yeah. One of my kids, same thing. You know, there was a psychiatrist, and she went to psychiatric stuff and whatever else. And she said, we got to put him on Ritalin. I said, you're not putting my kid on Ritalin. I said, I want the chief. Now, this is Walter Reed. I want the chief of neurology, and I want him or her to take a look at my kid and tell me what's going on. You know what happened at the end of that? The guy took a look, and he says, there's no way this kid is going on Ritalin. Right. There's no way and that's a parental thing. Lee, you got more kids than a baseball team. I'd say, when you have kids like this, Steve, you have kids, Nick, you have kids. You're going to, as a parent, you're going to become involved in that. And you're going to say, wait a minute, time out. You're sitting here saying, my kid's got to go on drugs. Why? I want a second opinion or a third opinion, or how many you want. You get every right to do that. And that's, Mark, you seem perfectly normal. You seem perfectly normal to me. So
there have been entire movies and books where people have literally been given away their rights and everything, and the rights have been taken by the government. And that's what I'm concerned about. Is that a fear that you have as well, that somebody could come in there, whether it's around medication or whether it's around whatever, and be like, basically like, you got to do this, and if you don't do it, then we're going to have you do this and everything. So it can almost put us in a more strenuous kind of lockdown. I'm not talking
about your kid can't come to school.
Huh?
Although yank the kid said the kid can't come to school till you abide.
Right. And if that's the rule, then and that can create some very interesting kind of governments out
friction.
There. Huh?
A lot of friction between the parent and the school.
Right.
Yeah. Get over it. It's called life.
Go ahead, Steve. Go ahead, Steve. Go ahead. You want to talk about immigration?
Steve, come over to the fence now. Let's talk about immigration.
Yeah.
Immigration. You just listen to me on the audio because I'm moving very slow today. But immigration, I think, is something very important. The refugees coming in, millions, skilled immigration issues. We've talked about this. Obviously, this is continuing to be a problem. We're not seeing solutions on either side. Just something I think we need to continue to talk about the show. But I think we can definitely see in 2022, it's fair to say that this problem has gotten worse. So we talked about the last show, but that's one thing I think we should talk about. The other thing I forgot in my monologue, but I think it's also important to talk about the Supreme Court, Roe v. Wade and Moore versus Harper, and lots of cases coming before the court that the Moore v. Harper is big because it would support gerrymandering, which I think you'll see more political parties in power, changing maps. And if there's no court oversight, we're going to see more of that. And then, of course, the midterms. And we got to end talking about the war in Ukraine. Zelensky came here, another $44 billion, President's giving. This is Time Man of the Year, Vladimir Zelensky. Him and his wife are very brave and quite moving of how they're down there with the people helping fight for freedom. And I think we should end the show talking about that. But just want to sort of start that discussion. Let's talk inflation.
Immigration part, and I'd love to hear Nick's thoughts on, and then I'll definitely want to hear from everybody else as well. But when it comes to immigration, I brought this up before. I think that there is a twofold approach to immigration that is totally wrong, because we're not treating immigration alike and everything. We're letting those that you're talking about that are the quote unquote qualified workers from India and everything else come in there. But then if they're from a poor country or some of the other countries, then we are not giving them as much fair treatment as some of those that are from the richer countries and things in that lane. So I do think that there is a class and maybe even race issues that are in our immigration policy.
Sorry, Mark.
And hold on. The other thing I was going to add to that, and then I definitely want to hear from you, Lee, and everything, is that not only that, but I am also laying at the feet of the blame to some degree the corporations, because if there are farm organizations and major corporate farms that are knowingly allowing people in from Mexico that they know or that they are not vetting, that they are not illegal and everything, isn't that part of the problem? Like, you got these big companies down there in Texas and Arizona and a number of other places that are allowing folks to come. They're not trying to find out whether they are or aren't illegal and everything, because they need those workers, because there are a lot of people in those states that don't want to work in those farms. So they're letting them in. Doesn't matter to try to figure out who they are or what they are or why they wanted to come there. They're just letting them in. That to me is a problem with the corporations, and the corporations need to do something about that. I don't know if folks agree with me, but I think the corporations need to have part of the blame as well.
Go ahead.
Yeah, putting genocide aside, because that's horrible, and we should have compassion for those people if there's genocide in the country. Does anyone have a right to come to America? A right.
I mean, what we call
it's a privilege. Does anyone have a right to come here?
No.
It's a privilege.
Why are we letting
it's a
people
privilege.
come here then?
Driving.
The statute.
I'm sorry, Chris.
Bring me your poor, you're tired, you're huddled masses, Lee. It says it right on the statute of limitations.
Yeah, but the statute of liberty was given to us by France, and they're a bunch of assholes.
Okay, Nick, if that's what you're going to use, that means everybody has a right to come here? Unlimited?
I don't think
no restrictions?
No, Lee, the system, that's the problem, Lee. And I think, and before I want to go into the Ukraine war and talk a little bit about end the year with the saucy politics, which I think is always a great way to end, talk about where we're headed in America. But Lee, that's a good point, and I think we'll move on to the next issue. The fact of the matter is that there's a confusion between asylum and immigration. So there's never a right to come to any country. You have to go through the laws to come here. Any immigrant, like my parents, to come in. We have a lot of skilled immigrants. My parents. We have a lot of skilled
immigrants. Great parents. Yes.
Thousands that are here legally.
Before the country was formed.
No, but let me finish my point.
Not unlimited, Nick. Otherwise, you're going to see Putin cross the border. We can let Putin in as a citizen.
We came here, and then 100 years later, you formed your country and took over our area of the world, Manhattan and New York.
Hey, Lee, what? I mean, you're talking about letting Putin in. We let Noriega in way back when. I mean,
I don't know why we
let him in jail, but we let him in.
We didn't really let him. We kind of put him in jail, but yeah, I mean, it's let him in. We let him in.
Here, and those are the ones
we can do the same with Putin. That's my point.
Put him in exile in Alaska. Yeah.
So, just real quickly, Steve, before we go on, just to Nick, you can't have open borders in a welfare state. The two cannot exist. Am I wrong?
True.
But let me finish my point. Let me finish the point before we go on to the next issue.
Go ahead, Steve.
Issues, but to answer the Lee's question, I think there's a confusion between asylum and immigration. And as I said, we have a lot of skilled immigrants that are coming here according to the laws, and they're being forced to leave, going to countries like Canada. And they're driving a lot of innovation and job growth, particularly when we need tech jobs to fill our economy. But then, asylum is typically guaranteed when there's persecution or torture, and we don't have enough asylum judges, and we can't process these asylum cases. But I think, as I've said time and time again on the show, the situations are so bad in these countries that they want to come to the United States of America. So I think we have to figure out how do we make those democracies stronger and better, so that people aren't being in such bad circumstances. They just say, well, I want to come and seek asylum in the U.S. And the answer to your question is no. Not everyone has a right. There's always going to be a limit of foreigners that can come in the country based on legal limits. And any country has immigration laws. So we really need a solution. And I don't see that happening anytime.
I have to say something to that, Steve. I get it. You're an empathetic guy, which is really cool, and I think that's great. Unfortunately, empathy comes with money. So if you're thinking that you can turn around Venezuela, if you're thinking that you can the U.S. can sit back and say, "Hey, we're going to turn around Venezuela. We'll give you $100 million. We'll give you as much money as we're giving Ukraine right now for weapons." And guess where that money's going to go? It's going to go into dictators' pockets. It's going to go into the Swiss bank accounts. It's going to go wherever. It's not going to go. And I did hazardous duty in a country where that exactly happened. That's the problem with trying to turn around a country. The only people that can turn around a country are the people in that country. Now we can support that through whatever however we want to do that. But the bottom line is this is a lot of money we're talking about going to Venezuela, going to Colombia, going to Ecuador, going to Peru, going to all these different countries that are having these problems. Guess what? That's not our problem. That's not our problem. Our problem is right now at the border, sitting there. Title 42 is in effect now, and that's interesting because Biden is sitting back going, well, that's okay. Oh, and also they're doing tests on Chinese. Can you imagine how xenophobic can you get? How racist is that, Mark? We're doing testing on Chinese coming across from China because we want to make sure we don't get COVID in this country. Italians are doing it. French are doing it. The UK is doing it. All major countries are doing it. COVID is okay. I'm gone. COVID's taking over.
No, I hear totally what you're saying.
So
I actually went to a restaurant that is owned by
I'm going to close out with the Supreme Court, but why don't we go to Ukraine real quickly, Mark? We gotta talk about Ukraine. Where does everyone see this war going now?
It's continuing.
It's continuing. It's probably going to go through the rest of the year.
So I have something on my share screen. I wanted to share with you guys. This is polls.
Can I ask you a question about Ukraine?
Yeah.
Are we able to quantify the dollars that we're sending to Ukraine, the amount of money Ukraine's spending on their military, and the amount of money Russia's spending on their military in terms of the Ukrainian conquest?
Well, I can tell you right now that we've sent over $50 billion. It's $50 billion we've given to Ukraine. I mean, 50 billion. And it's in fact, I have that. I have that data. I don't have it right now with me, but I got it. But basically, so I wanted to talk about polls. So poll is slides to. This is, by the way, this is a Ukrainian news agency. It's not Russia. So Zelensky approval rating slides are 31%. Now this was back in September of 2021, right? So then all of a sudden, it's rating now under 50%, and that was in March of 20. And now, now we have, what do you think of Vladimir Zelensky? And this was as of June 2022. And they're like, well, hey, we're strongly approved. They strongly approved it in April at 74%. This thing has fallen to 59%. That from 20% to 32% has said, hey, this is somewhat approved. But you notice that the disapproval ratings are starting to rise now. So all these disapproval ratings are starting to rise. The approval, the strongly approve is coming down 59%. And this was funny because this was June. And now, in December, he's come over to the United States begging for more money. So, I mean, I'll tell you what's going to happen is the more we give to Ukraine, the longer this war is going to go. What we need to do is deplete Russia. Enough already with the idea that we are supposed to, we're supposed to support Ukraine. Bullcrap. And what we need to do is start to either get NATO troops and start putting them in Ukraine, or get NATO equipment, put them in Ukraine, get NATO pilots, put them in Ukraine, and just start to say, look, if you start, we're going to start bombing Russia. And let me tell you, you start bombing Russia, what are they going to do? They're going to sit there and say, oh, we're going to put a nuclear weapon. Now, I'm going to tell you there are two times in the history of the world, 1962 and 1983, when the Soviets were going to launch nuclear weapons against the United States. And in both situations, a Russian, and I'm going to do this on Lead from Love. I'm going to do these as special people. Two Russians, one in 1962 and one in 1983, basically said we're not launching. And because they said we're not launching, they did not launch nuclear weapons, and basically they saved the world from nuclear disaster. There are people like that exist right now in Russia. They're not going to launch nuclear weapons against us. They're not going to do that. If they're going to go conventional all the way.
I know you got to wrap up and everything, Steve, but Chris, one of the things that you brought up, and I think it's something that is also we saw a rise of in 2022, and I don't know that y'all would agree, but part of the conversation, even in Ukraine, was this notion of nationalism, every country for itself and for its own people, and I think that this whole war is an example of that, but I don't know what y'all's thoughts are, but we did see a rise in 2022 of a lot of countries that were more about supporting their own internal politics and not worrying about the outside politics of other nations. And it was kind of like, I think that you, Chris, one time said, Spain for Spain and some of those other countries for themselves. But I don't know your thoughts around that.
Sweden for Swedish, the whole 9 yards. And just quickly, 30 seconds. Basically, what happens is that's when you distrust other countries, that's called xenophobia. And basically, what happens is you distrust other countries, and you won't deal with them in any situation because you distrust them so much. It's xenophobic. The Ukrainians, xenophobic against the Russians. They don't trust the Russians at all. Russia, xenophobic against Ukraine. There's a lot of xenophobia going around, and I think that is the major problem. How do you solve that? Got to open up dialogue.
My final point.
What's the definition of the word phobia? Isn't it when there's no basis for the fear?
It's fear. Phobia is fear.
Baseless fear, though. Phobia. Like fear of heights, fear of the dark, fear of whatever. But if you have a basis for that fear, then it's not a phobia anymore. You're afraid of, these guys are walking down the block and you see them with weapons. You're going to cross the street because it's 2:00 in the morning. Or this country is full of terrorists. That's not unreasonable. That's not a phobia. That's opening your eyes to reality.
Guys, we gotta go to close out. I'm gonna go. Yeah. Lee, thank you for that point. And I apologize for the technical difficulties I've been having today, but I've been able to hear you. Hopefully, you've been able to hear me. My final point I'll make before I go to close out is that I think one thing that to end the war in Ukraine sooner is to actually cut Vladimir Putin off of oil. And so I think what's keeping him going is the fact that India and China and other countries are buying from him. And I think, as I've said time and time again, as well as Fareed Zakaria, we need an energy transition strategy where we can open up the pipelines, produce more oil, so we're not so dependent on other nations. And this could actually help Europe. And I think as long as he knows that he's going to be increasing revenue every day by getting barrels of oil, then this man will never stop doing what he's doing. And so on that note, I want to say,
Lee, I know you're here to close out, Stephen. I'm definitely going to let you do that. But we did not mention one other story that was very much in the news and everything. And I definitely think that if you are going to go overseas and play a sport, you need to know the laws of that said area. So while I'm glad that Brittany Griner is back home and all along those lines, because that was a major news story that we didn't mention and everything, I also know that whether it's her or whether it was the gentleman that was the subject of the movie about Turkey that was actually featuring a Marquette person and everything way back when, and all that, you need to know those laws. Otherwise, there's the good danger that you will get arrested and wind up spending some time. And actually, she spent a lot less time than the guy did from Midnight Express, if I remember the title of the movie correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my final closeout is, we didn't really talk about it, but I think it's a great way to wrap up the year, is the United States Supreme Court. We're seeing a lot of changes in the expectations of our high court. Typically, the Supreme Court has been the neutral arbiter, the high court that would set law and precedent for many, many, many years. Brown versus Board of Education, which eliminated separate by equal. The voting rights laws of our country that give every American the right to vote. Civil rights laws, and all of these things were done at the end of the day by the policy of the Supreme Court. We saw with the overturning of Roe v. Wade a shift, a movement of a more conservative court that's willing to shift back precedents. And we've heard dangers of other rights possibly being taken. But with that being said, they were appointed by the president, at that time a Republican, and they are holding to their conservative views. I don't think it's very safe for a court to be politicized, and I think that's what you're seeing on both sides of the spectrum, Democrat and Republican. We don't know what's going to happen with Moore versus Harper, but it will have a significant effect on the way elections are handled, particularly federal elections, if courts cannot intervene. The role of the Supreme Court is changing, and I think that's something that we need to look at in America as we move forward, is, do we need term limits? Do we need to have an independent commission that's appointing these justices rather than the President of the United States? Do these justices need to be in for lifetime appointments? Because one thing is perfectly clear. The United States Supreme Court today is becoming increasingly powerful in terms of their ability to make decisions that may last half a century or a century. Is that something that we want to do, or do we want to have more checks and balances in our system, in our republic, so the court cannot have as much influence? Now, of course, Congress can also intervene and have judicial review and review these court decisions. But do we want to have Supreme Court decisions and then a Congress that's striking down the decisions made by the court? This is something I think we'll talk about in the new show as we bring in constitutional scholars to talk about the United States Supreme Court, the role of the Supreme Court. But I will tell you, this year, 2022, has been a game-changing year for the court, and some very landmark decisions coming in. But the elephant in the room is Roe v. Wade. And we'll be talking about that again, as now it's up to the states to implement abortion regulation. And we're watching in North Carolina with pins and needles what Speaker Tim Moore will do now with only one vote away from a supermajority of the House, saying that he will bring the House into session to talk about abortion restrictions coming into the 2023 long session. We thank you all for being with us on this last show of the year. I'll be back late next week, as I will be in Washington, the nation's capital. But want to thank you all for being with us on this very divisive, sometimes turbulent show, but a respectful show. And I want to thank my colleagues for having a wonderful 2022 as we've been able to report the news around the United States and around the world. From our family to yours, we want to wish you all the best in 2022, and we hope for a successful and prosperous 2023 wherever you are in the country or the world. This is Steve Rao, December 30th on Pod and Roku TV, signing off. Have a wonderful day and happy.
Steve, see you next year.
Yeah. See you next year.
Take care, Mark. See you next year.
Yeah.